Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Walking Dead. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I was really curious to see ultimately where we kind of started with this whole Commonwealth thing. Apparently, we are starting in like a month into like everyone from Alexandria being in the Commonwealth, except for some people. We see like Lydia as well as Maggie, which we don't know who else decided to stay behind, but maybe only like a select few people went to kind of test the waters a little bit because they were there for like about a month to be like, all right, see how this is. So maybe all who wanted to go went, and who didn't want to go stayed, or anyone that had apprehensions. Like I said, it seemed like it was a trial basis thing, but I'm not sure if it's just like, oh, those who were there, it's a trial basis for us to determine whether we're going to stay, or whether it's a trial basis to be like, okay, we'll tell the others whether or not they should come here or not too. But that opening is so meta though, like with them being in that like haunted house, and he's like, whoa, come on, buddy. He's like, okay, yeah, sorry about that, go ahead. It's like, it's too meta considering like The Walking Dead has had stuff like that, like real world wise and stuff like that. So, it having something like that is just fascinating. It's like I said, just they did that on purpose because it's a little too meta, which also, it is kind of jacked up considering the horror show of a world you live in. Like, why would you ever like want something like that? But I guess it's like, well, why would humans want to be scared on a regular basis when the world is scary enough for just all the stuff that goes down on a regular basis? So I'm like, there's a human element to it of like, no, that's probably the truest human form of like thing of like, yeah, probably like want something to scare the crap out of you, which it just seems like in this world that just seems extra deadly because you'll just not perceive everything as a threat as much. It'll kind of soften you a little bit. I don't know. This episode also gave me a different perspective on the Commonwealth. Like, we'd gotten peeks before. Obviously, we got good chunks and looks at it before, but I guess it never really hit me until we saw people from Alexandria here enjoying it, like having jobs. Like, Connie's a reporter now, which apparently, maybe that came up before. I don't remember that ever coming up, but she was a reporter before. In fact, her and Pamela go back because she interviewed Pamela once, and then Kelly was like, yeah, you remember you got her uncle removed from like office or something like that. And it was like, wait, that was you? Because even Carol was like, yeah, I've only known Pamela through like tabloids and stuff. I'm like, that's wild. And it's so weird. It's also interesting too, like, because obviously we see like Carol baking. I'm like, oh, that's sweet. Because it just makes me think about her first days in Alexandria. Because that was the comparison I was going to make. I'll get to that and say, but it's like, yeah, what'd she do? Like, her facade was like, oh, hi, I'm like the happy neighbor that's cooking like a whole bunch of sweets and stuff, like, yeah, I'm baking and stuff like that, aren't I? You know, that was like her like disguise she put on at time, because that was when Carol was kind of a lot darker than she has been for a while, because that was post after being on her own for a while and finally reuniting with the group after getting kicked out of the prison. Well, you know, but regardless. But my point was, I thought it was so interesting because the closest we have in this story, at least to my recollection, I feel like, to like this community was probably like prime, like peak Alexandria, that being season 5 Alexandria when we met it. Like, that seemed like such a dream, and like, oh my god. And you look at the Commonwealth, you're like, this is unreal. It feels like this world was untouched by the outside. I guess truth be told is like, well, at least in the confines of this show, I'd say like probably the next to the Commonwealth, not even Alexandria, would probably be, I mean, we haven't gotten a peek inside, but I'm assuming like the Republic. But what we've seen in like the Walking Dead World Beyond and stuff like that, where all the research was going down like that facility and stuff. So it's like, that's probably the second closest like more advanced place, but that kind of needs to be more advanced and stuff. It's just interesting. Also, speaking of Pamela, I was actually surprised about it. I was like, wait. And it's like, yeah, that's Lila Robbins. I was like, holy crap, I wasn't expecting that. Obviously, most recent things I've best know her from is like The Blacklist, and obviously The Boy. So comic book connection there, which I'm always like, it's always interesting just knowing different people going from one comic book property thing to another. It's just always interesting. Like, Denai going, you know, being in this, The Walking Dead, and then also being in Black Panther. Once again, just one of those interesting things. Same day for the actor who plays Jerry, because he's in this, and I'm assuming he's going to be in Shazam too. because he's the foster dad. So like, just always interesting how that works out like that. But yeah, the illustrious Pamela, we finally, Miss Milton, we finally get to meet her, and kind of, once again, just everyone kind of slowly adjusting to everything. We have Rosita and Daryl are working to join like Mercer's, like the, I forgot, they probably have a specific name, but I'm blanking on it. It's the squad, basically almost like essentially a military / police force. But you're supposed to be working as a team, but the problem is like Daryl, well, this is also Daryl he works well with a team, but it's usually only people he knows, cause he's always been very like, I guess it's like he doesn't want to work well with other people, cause it's like, well, the last time he got close to someone was the whole Leah thing, and we saw how that whole debacle turned out, so it's just kind of like, maybe this is also, this is also post the Maggie thing of her like killing everyone except for Leah, so it's like, of course, I think that's all going to be like a little still with him in the aftermath. So he was like, no, don't worry about it. Like, because Mercer ended up stepping in. He's like, no, like I had him, like I was right there. And it's like, I told you this training exercise was about speed and efficiency and like, and teamwork is what he was saying. So Rosita and her teammate were doing their thing, but Daryl was kind of off on his own. So, but it's also, once again, even prior to all this, he was on his own for a long time after, Rick, quote unquote, died. So I think a lot of that's still there. And even when he did collaborate with people, he slowly opened up on, it's with people he knows. This is a group he's not really quite sure how he feels about it yet. I think he's still like sussing things out and such. So, but Mercer brought him to see Sebastian. It was like, oh, cool, this tool. And it's like, yeah. And he found Judith's blade and he just tossed it aside, which is like, that's like, it's not like you can say anything to him because once again, his power and position, but it's like, yeah, the sword he tosses out, like, oh, this toothpick, it's like, it's Judith's because it reminds her of her mom. It's like a keepsake too. It's not only her weapon, but like he tries to make it seem like, oh, it's advanced training, military training and such. And even Mercer's like, advanced military training. Yeah, you're just coming out here to play, trying to act tough. But basically the newest weapons that get confiscated when people come to the Commonwealth, he practices on with them. So Daryl ended up having to save him, but the problem was it was in front of his mom too. So, and his mom looked so disappointed in him. That's why he was so upset, because she's just like, oh, my mom saw me so like vulnerable, because he's only like shown respect and he's only gotten his position and stuff like that because of who his mom is. So, but I think it was interesting that Mercer's like, I get it. He's like, this place is the best place I've ever seen. And like, you could have a spot here if you could get out your own damn way. So once again, it's that interesting aspect of the Commonwealth being treated like this place that's untouched by the outside world. I feel like I've thought about it, but I feel like I've just never really given it thought until like we went into more, now that characters we like or care about are kind of now officially kind of sort of a part of the society. We're seeing like Magna like being a server at that party and stuff like that. Like I said, Connie being a journalist and stuff, like people with like quote unquote regular jobs. It's weird. Princess just being, cause wasn't she a DJ? Wasn't that what she was doing? Cause she runs a music store. So like, yeah, but and she also does like she's got the princess look and everything too, which is like super cool. At first I legitimately almost didn't recognize her. I was like, wait, oh, that's Princess. Oh crap. I almost didn't recognize her. That's wild. Well, because also like, because I almost don't recognize the actress when she didn't have like the purple wig on as Princess. I almost didn't recognize her like when I caught glimpses of her like during like the Talking Dead and stuff. I was like, oh wow, she like it's so weird like how much a wig can change that much, I don't know. I have like I'm not going to go as far as say like face blindness or something, but it's always shocking to me when I'm like, oh wow, when people look so different with like different colored hair, their hairstyle different. You're almost like, oh, I didn't even recognize it was you. Tangents aside and stuff, but it is just this weird thing of just like, oh, like I said, regular jobs for people, the party, but getting into like the fact is that apparently the Commonwealth has a social divide, which are like, that doesn't seem like something I guess it would, because there's always going to be those who have and those who have not. That will always be a basic in this world. That will always be a fundamental aspect of this world. Now it's just literally like in a world, in a place where it's like, oh, everything's everything's good, everything's kosher, and then it's like, no, there's a divide. In particular, that dude Tyler, who's the one Princess beat up during the bonus episodes. I believe that was during the bonus episodes. That might have been the beginning of the season. I'm trying to remember. Regardless, no, it was the bonus episodes. It's like, I think he's the dude that she beat up and captured and stuff. Um, But it's like, yeah, because of that, like he got demoted and he lost everything because with that position, it's like he had the money and stuff like that necessary to take care of his family, which includes his sister and her kids. And so he got desperate. He's like, I want to talk to, he's like, I made one mistake. I got captured and I got punished like this. It wasn't my fault. Like, it's not like I did something bad. It's just I got beat up. Those people are part of the Commonwealth now, but it doesn't matter. Like, I failed at my job. So he got such a big punishment and he held like her assistant Max like at knife point and just like, do you know my name? And she's like, no. And I think that's probably also the point, like, oh, you're so low on the totem pole that she wasn't because you're just a grunt. She knows Connie's name. To be fair, Connie's someone that she knows. But even Connie, because Connie's the one that's like, yeah, did you notice like the social divide and stuff like that? You were literally having this ritzy party when there are people who were kind of struggling, you know? Because even Magna literally says the words later on. It's like, oh, have you noticed that this place is pretty much like a city from before? It's like, so a lot of the issues that the old world have would come here too, except people have changed and aren't the same people that they were before. I mean, there'll probably be people who are desperate like that, but in a world where desperation is around every corner, where you live in a world that's in the state that it's in, once again, like, when you have something, you're going to be that much more desperate to keep it considering the state of the world. I mean, once again, it's applicable to like the real life and even without the walker, zombie, rotters like element to it, like that still be applicable in the real world, but even more so in a world where there is nothing. Like, it's like, yeah, I need to make it work here. I need the money to take care of my family or we'll have nothing. It's like, you know, what does being on the lower end, like kind of like, what does being poor in like the Commonwealth look like? Like, you know, like, are there people who are homeless? Because like Daryl and Rosita were living in pretty shabby places simply because it's like, right, like you have to get the money necessary to pay for better places. So that's why they were trying to get their jobs where they are. So, but Daryl, being the team player that he is, ended up helping Sebastian out because when he stopped Tyler from killing himself. It's like, right, you got family. Not everyone in this world is lucky to have that. Do not take that away from like your sister. And so turns himself in and he gives the credit to Sebastian. Because I thought Sebastian was going to go buck wild. He's like, you know what I'm going to do? I was so certain he was going to be a dick and just kill the guy. But Daryl was like, nah, I didn't catch him. You did. And so I guess having someone like Sebastian in your favor and be like, hey, because even Rosita was like, oh, he hates you. That was a hate smile he gave you when he was going into the party. So, which I also love that Princess was able to get into the party because Mercer was like, yeah, this ain't really my scene, but and she kind of gets invited along, and I'm like, oh, that's and he's like, because the guy's like, yeah, there's a certain attire here, and then like Mercer just kind of looks at him like, yo, I say if she's with me, she's with me. So I'm like, I think that's so cute because she like from the rip. Let's not forget, like Princess was like, yo, that's a handsome ass man. I'm like, yo. Which I think that's such a cute little pairing. I'm curious to see if that, hopefully that does turn into something serious. Because this episode also presents the thing of like, who's forming their own little resistances? Because Tyler made the point, like when he was being dragged away, he's like, no, like it isn't just me. There are thousands. Which Pamela like, is there really thousands? And Hornsby's like, nah, there isn't. She's like, make sure. But later on, we see at the end of the episode, Rosita does come into a room and it's like, it's a full blown resistance. It's like, oh, equality and stuff like that. Once again, weird stuff you wouldn't expect to see in a zombie apocalypse. But once again, it's like this place is supposed to be built on the foundation of like, oh, this is us taking back society brick by brick. I mean, makes you wonder, does the CR have similar issues as well, considering, you know, the society they're trying to build back up and stuff. So I just think that's so interesting. to know like, oh yeah, you have a full blown resistance. And the question is, even like Rosita start questioning Magna, and she's like, well, you think I'm lying? It's like, no, I'm just trying to get the lay of the land. It's like, yeah, like I do believe what he said, that he isn't the only one, and kind of leaves. And Rosita's just kind of like, So it's like, yeah, so Magna's only been here for like 30 days or something. And it's like, you're siding with it, but it might not be like she's part of the resistance or anything. It's like, is it going to be people we know that are part of it? Like, I don't think so, but it's like the way the Commonwealth is run, and to be fair, let's not forget how Team Alexandria came to be. It's like, oh man, remember when Rick and them rolled in and eventually everything led to them kind of running the place, kind of. They were there. It was because that was a conversation early on too about like, not like, because I think it was a conversation between Daryl and Carol about like, oh, like everything here seems okay, but he basically said like, yeah, there's always going to be like a price to pay. Like you always have to, like, there's always going to be something a little wrong that needs to be changed. So that's the perspective I kind of got there. And that's kind of like Alexandria. It started off like, oh, this place seems good. And then like they kind of ran things a certain way. And it's like, oh, you have to accumulate to how Alexandria is run. And then it's kind of like, nah, they kind of kept doing their own thing. So it is interesting that I guess Daryl has become what is essentially the closest thing to a kind of, like I said, a military force, but also like a police officer of sorts, especially when he handcuffed Sebastian. I was like, oh, a little bit of that, like Rick rubbing off on him in some regard, I wonder. I thought that was kind of pretty interesting. His main, like, he had his reasons for, like, I think he wasn't filling the place because too much of your freedom was kind of restricted. It's just kind of having to bend down to someone else's rules when so long it's just kind of being able to stick with your own community and stuff like that. And so, but it's because RJ and Judith enjoy it here and they want to stay, and it's like, yeah, it's like, and even Judith saying like, as long as Michonne can find us where we are, then I'm okay with staying here. And I think that's what solidified it for him later on to do the whole thing with Sebastian to help him, to be a team player essentially. Because I think like he still had his reservations about everything, and I think that's why he was also, I think that added to why he was kind of being so resistant to it. Which Judith is also making friends here as well. She ended up meeting her friend May, and her friend May gave her like the music, and it's like, oh, can I get the receipt? And May's like, no, you don't have to pay me. She's like, no, I just want a reminder of a good day. And I was like, oh, that's sweet. So that's cool. I hope it doesn't turn into that awkward situation of like, yeah, you were out there, because she was like, oh my god, like you went out there, you've killed a whole bunch of rotters and stuff. It's like, that's pretty cool. Like I hope it doesn't turn into that thing of like, yeah, like my friend Judith's kind of wild, and like that doesn't end up in that territory of things kind of getting, I don't know. I feel like that could easily turn into something bad. But I mean, just always waiting for the other shoe to drop is kind of like a mentality, you kind of can't help but have with this show, but also I think it's a mentality that a lot of people in the show end up having. Because Carol's checking in on Ezekiel, and he's like, like everything is fine, I'm good, no changes in my condition. Which really quickly, I love that. I think that was really sweet, like giving one of Jerry's kids Shiva's chain, and it's like, yeah, Jerry saved this when the place was burning down because he knows how important it is to me. And it's like, all right, for one, he was basically like, the condition was one of the conditions was basically like, always remember Shiva, like, because it is important to Ezekiel, but he wanted to pass on that on. I was like, I do love that he does still. I don't think that comes up that often, but I did love that being a reminder of Shiva for him. And you're like, oh, because sometimes you do forget. It's just something that's not always in the forefront. It's like, oh yeah, he had a tiger. Like sometimes you just kind of let that slip your mind. It's like, oh right, at one point in time, he had a tiger. R.I.P. Shiva. But nevertheless, Carol ends up breaking into the doctor's office and ended up looking at Ezekiel's records, and his condition is pretty bad. He's 147 on the list to getting surgeries, but it's like, if he doesn't get a surgery soon enough, he will die. And he would basically, he would need to be moved up the list. So Carol kind of makes some dealings with Hornsby to make it happen. First it was the wine, but it didn't give Hornsby the leeway with Pamela he was hoping it would. But he's like, oh, this is the first step, which Carol's willing to do whatever it takes. It's like, yeah, for the people she cares about. It's like, okay, you know, what you need me to do next? She's not above like getting her hands dirty for the people she cares about. We've seen that time and time again. I think that was a really bittersweet, obviously, thing between her and Ezekiel, where it's like, right, here's something like, obviously at the time he didn't think she was ready to have it, but he's like, it belongs to you, and it's a box of Henry stuff. Because even he's like, yeah, the kids are having a blast. He's like, I think he would have enjoyed this. And you're like, oh, R.I.P. Henry. I'm sure also Carol doesn't like thinking about that. Not only because, well, essentially her son died, but also it's like, yeah, she was in a pretty dark place afterwards, wanting revenge against Alpha, and she was so focused on that led to so much tragedy afterwards. So obviously she's going to have some complicated feelings about that. But I'm curious to see what other stuff she ends up having to do for Hornsby to kind of make this all happen. Really quickly, I'm thinking about that whole Sebastian thing, which is definitely going to be interesting. The fact is that he kind of got a little glory, and he's probably going to be like, oh, Daryl, you're not on my shit list anymore. But the fact is that I feel like, considering his storyline, like, not unless he ends up being one of those people that shifts and changes, the fact is that he could be that egotistical, spoiled brat that ends up becoming an issue later on. What's that character's name? Isaac? I don't remember. The original mayor of, like, Alexandria, her son, was such a tool. Especially, like, he tried to, like, the whole Negan thing, and I think, wasn't it, like, Negan gutted him, if I remember correctly? That's how he died. He was always aiming for Rick. I believe that guy's name was Isaac. I don't remember. It's been so long, I don't remember. I'm wondering if, like, Sebastian might turn that route. And it seems like that might be the case, so... And, you know, speaking of Sebastian and everything, like, I should have talked about this earlier. Just tying back to the Pamela thing, I think is interesting. Like, oh, it's a small world. Like, oh, here's people we recognize, but it might just be a general area thing. But it's like, oh, here's someone I recognize from, like, the tabloids and stuff. And it just reminds me of, like, the whole Beta thing of, like, Negan being like, holy shit, do you know who that was? And then Daryl being like, yeah, some asshole. So just like, it's just interesting to know, like, oh yeah, like, once again, there was a before and all that. So that's what I think it's just definitely going to be interesting, especially because, like, World Beyond kind of did a lot of that, like, focusing on, like, the before. Whereas, like, this show for a long time has always been about, like, trying to build something after the fact and something similar to before. But I think this is the closest we've gotten in this show. And I feel like Fear doesn't really dive into it too much, the before of it all, but, you know, I mean, well, Fear's got its own issues and stuff like that with nukes getting dropped, so there's even more on their table. But still, I'm very interested to see where this all ends up taking us. Once again, this is like, at the last time date we checked was 33 days into them joining the Commonwealth. There's still like 5 months, well, a little less than 5 months till we get to that ending that we got last episode. So once again, will they immediately jump to that? We'll kind of still be feeling like, is it just going to be jumping around time wise? It's like, oh, now it's like a kind of similar, like, to the early episodes of, like, one of the first 2 or so episodes of, like, Why the Last Man, for example. Is it going to be a thing of, like, cool, it's been, like, now 2 months now, and then 3 months, the next episode? I'm curious to see how they do that. Probably bounce back and forth and see, like, okay, so this is what the Commonwealth was up to. Next episode, we find out, like, anyone else that isn't there, like, what they're up to, potentially the Maggie, Lydia, maybe Aaron and stuff like that. I'm assuming, you would think Aaron would be there, especially with the whole Gracie angle to it all, but like I said, we don't know. We probably didn't catch up with everyone that was there, but I feel like they probably would have made a point, because we got a glimpse of Gabriel, who was like, yo, like, I'm, you know, he's looking after Coco, and he's like, oh, I'm going to, you know, obviously it's like, oh, she's like, yeah, I'll be back in time for, like, your Bible study days go. So it's like, okay, I think he's trying to find his way back to God and everything. But it's also like, right, your job typically is associated with what you actually did before. I'd actually forgot to touch on it too. Because there was something earlier, I was like, oh, there was something I wanted to talk about, but I couldn't remember what it was. Luckily I did. It's the whole Yumiko thing. Her and her brother aren't in a good place, because he's like, this has never been my world, it's been yours. So I guess, like, before everything, He never really lavished in, like, yeah, he was a doctor and everything, a surgeon. So it's like, man, I don't, he never liked the high ritzy stuff. But I guess Yumiko really like leaned into that. And even then, it's like, yeah, her and Magna ran into each other. Magna gives them drinks and stuff. And it's like, oh, hi. And they didn't really talk to each other because I guess it's still part of that class divide of like, she's kind of, I'm higher class and she's kind of the help. It, once again, fueling more to that, divide and no equality type of thing. So that's why I feel like it does seem like Magna might be about that. I mean, she does have a rebellious streak in her, so like I wouldn't be too surprised. I'm just interested to really dive into where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.